So thank you very much for coming this morning. It's lovely to see your smiling faces. My name's Elspeth Griffiths. I'm the Director of Workforce, HR Workforce and OD at South Central West. And I can see you're all looking bright-eyed and bushy-tailed, so that's very lovely to see. And this session aims to get you to thinking and to ease you into your day ahead at the conference. So over the last 2 days, we've, with colleagues, we've been doing sessions presenting thoughts, solutions and insights into how we can support you with your challenges and some of the innovative ideas and approaches we can apply to help. So that's kind of what we're talking about today. And some of my team yesterday, you might have seen them presented on workforce planning and workforce optimisation. And we also have a session on OD later on today as well that you might want to participate or come along to. So SCW provide a wide range of services to a number of NHS and non-NHS organisations, and one of them is on HR, workforce and OD. And we do that with a large number of clients as well as using consultancy. So some of it is about services that we provide to organisations on an ongoing basis, but some of it is also about more bespoke consultancy work. But sometimes we think the best example of the work that we do is the work that we do with our own organisation. So I'm going to talk a little bit about that and whether some of the approaches that we've applied would work for your organisation. So, again, it's a fairly open slide, but with the increasing level of choice and flexibility, understanding individuals and their particular characteristics is really vital to an organisation. And the growing power of the voice of underrepresented groups has raised expectations in the workplace around equality, diversity and inclusion of the workforce. So all of that comes into a very much more complex picture. And being responsive and understanding as an employer is a key driver for us. So how do we understand the huge variety of needs to create meaningful approaches to our workforce? Because our workforce, as we all know, is not a homogenised group. They're not one single set, so one size does not fit all, and that sort of approach is no longer sufficient. So it's okay, but it's not enough. We need to be much more segmented in our approach about how we can retain and engage our workforce. So how do we make them feel that staff are treated as a unique individual with an organisational context while still ensuring equity and inclusion? And it's getting that balance right and making sure that we can do that well, because we're in a very complex environment. So you probably know this, but why understanding your workforce is important. So we need to understand our workforce, and it's absolutely vital that we understand it well and in detail so that we can respond to their needs and also our customers' needs and requirements, but also to make sure that we're an attractive employer and can predict gaps and plan for how we may try to meet those gaps. So this kind of slide, as you would imagine, just gives you some of the drivers and why it's really important that we understand the workforce and the ways in which we can do that by segmenting and breaking it down into particular blocks. So previous sessions held by colleagues have focused on workforce planning tools and optimisation and approaches that can be used to support an organisation with its resourcing challenges. And key to this is understanding the workforce, but being able to segment it into bite-sized chunks, so that it becomes not only more manageable, but also more relevant to groups within your whole workforce. In an increasingly competitive employment market, this will be more important than ever, and we already know that there's a lot of workforce challenges out there, and one of the key themes of this conference is around workforce. And whilst the pandemic brought many challenges to most employers, retaining staff and engaging new staff wasn't one of them for us. In a closed environment, closed market, it meant that we retained all of our staff. We actually engaged a lot more staff than we had done before from a very wide range of geographical areas, which we hadn't done before either, because working at home and virtual working meant that we had a wider pool to pull from. All of that is great, but it also brings additional challenges as we move back into a more standardised workforce and workforce pattern. So, and now we're getting into the advent of what is called the Great Resignation, as people review their plans and what they want to do with the future. and whether they want to stay with their current employer. And as a result, we are getting more turnover, not to very high levels, but all of that means that we have to have a different approach and we have to work on our approach really hard. So we're all quite well versed, I think, probably, in protected characteristics and how, as an inclusive employer, we need to consider all the elements that can potentially disadvantage, exclude or marginalise. And this slide, which I'm sure you will have seen, expands the scope of the multiple characteristics we all have in our workforce and how, with a segmented approach, we can focus on those areas that would make the most difference to our staff and to us as an employer. And later in this presentation, I'm going to highlight some of the work that we're progressing in SCW to implement our agile, flexible and productive way of working, a programme called Building a Stronger Future Together. But another huge development aspect alongside this programme is a programme that we're calling Building a Culture of Belonging, which was something that was referenced in one of the conference speakers yesterday morning, about building an organisation where people feel they belong, they can bring their whole selves and they want to be. And that programme is at the heart of us understanding our workforce and what drives them. So an example of that could be for something that we are going to be moving on to and work with our staff is our approach to policies on the menopause, for example. By segmenting our data, we can be better informed about where the emphasis needs to be and allows us to focus on the areas of most need and most priority. So in terms of building our workforce and our workforce approach, one of the key drivers for us was to introduce a proportionate change that created equity. And this is why segmentation of and understanding our workforce was so important and ultimately is the bedrock of the programme approaches that we take. Deep dives into our data and supporting staff to establish staff network groups to inform our work helped us to start to introduce tools to support the workforce changes that we were making and implementing. So, for example, we started to map accessibility issues and introduced meeting subtitles and transcripts, and that was before MS Teams did that for us, which was obviously much easier now technology has moved on, but we started to use that before that so we could be more inclusive as an employer. And we utilise the expertise and experience of our networks to share top tips, for example, on using cameras if people had a visibility issue, or using backgrounds, which sometimes with people with visibility issues or hearing issues makes it really difficult for people to hear, using speakers, headphones, those sorts of things. So just again, top tips and people sharing their experience and how we can make it better and help other people understand, because most of it is about learning through understanding, so that we can actually deal with those issues that people individually face. We also have geospatial expertise, which we used, and systems to create an interactive mapping tool using ESR data that's very flexible, with the ability to set parameters of what information we need or where we want to focus our attention. We can, for example, show female staff a set of their age range that lives within a particular radius of an office, or those with a disability, so that we can start to inform our policies and approaches and strategies for staff by segmenting those groups, and we can make it more meaningful and specific. So we, as an organisation, like many organisations here, have more than one site. So we're over a very widespread geographical area, and that's one of the reasons why segmenting your workforce is really important, related to either where they live or other characteristics, because we can't treat them all as a homogenised group. So most employers will have a broad range of data that's available to use, some of which is shown on this slide as an example, but not all of it is hard factual data. So that's one of the things that we will use as a bedrock. But then around that, we also use soft intelligence and qualitative information, which we combine with the factual and data sets to give a richer, deeper picture to inform our approaches and priorities. And by looking at the workforce data in small segmented groups, we can use this information to then test hypotheses that we might want to pose and check against feedback about whether that's the right answer, does that work, is that actually the question, so that we can work that through and come up with solutions for staff and alternative approaches. So visualisation of workforce is really important as well, because dealing with data is not the most exciting thing, to be honest, is it? It's it is for some people. Some of my colleagues in BI would argue with that. But in terms of data, it needs to be pictorial. So it needs to be represented in a way that people can understand and use it usefully. So using tools to visualise your workforce and segment into particular groups can be really useful for a number of reasons. And in the context of this presentation, I'm going to focus on tools and approaches can give insight, and then using those details to develop approaches that talk directly to individuals as part of our retention and engagement strategies. And as I briefly referenced, I'm going to use SCW as an example of some of the work that we've done to deliver key organisational change programmes, some of which we're still ongoing and will continue for many years, I have no doubt, within our organisation. But the beauty of these tools and processes is that they are able to be used individually and independently. They can be used together. They're scalable and they're appropriate for all organisations, and we can bring our knowledge and expertise and experience to share and inform your own programmes and developments. And that's kind of one of the things that we always want to get across as an organisation. We're an NHS organisation supporting NHS organisations to deliver their best and support them with their changes. So this is kind of, again, a fairly general side about retaining and attraction, but it describes some of the options that visualisation of data and information can assist within retention and attracting. And this was a slide that we used as part of a programme that we delivered in alignment with NHS England to support the national programme of recruiting international GPs. So geospatial visualisation is an excellent tool that can be used in a number of ways because it basically maps all of your data on the parameters that you set and the parameters that you want to have. So, for example, we can use ESR data to map our current workforce. We can then overlay national data and information if we need to research into opportunities, for example, for new services or new locations. So it's very, very manageable in that in terms of overlaying. As well as, so you can see where the gaps are, you can see where the challenges might be, and you can see where the opportunities are. And it can be used in really simple ways as well. So good ways of highlighting potential candidates who may be relocating. And in this example, for international GPs, it was about supporting them and considering different locations. So, for example, places of worship, schools, what the housing market looked like, other jobs, other locations, those sorts of things. So it's all really useful and can be tied down to a particular location. So this is an example of one of the maps that we might use, and we've got our fab geospatial team at the back, so Ian's at the back. So if you want to have a chat with him, then please do so. Go and have a talk about what he can do and what we can do to help your organisation. And they can give you a demo on some of the tools that we have at our disposal and how we can develop something that you can use that's bespoke to your workforce and organisation and really can assist in the use of data to base decisions on, ultimately engage and retain staff and inform and drive our policies accordingly. But it is just one picture. So of course that's the factual data in terms of the stuff that we know, and then of course you overlay that with some of the feedback and some of the softer information that we get from workforce, new joiners, exit surveys, other staff, to build a much richer picture in terms of what we might need to do. So these are our values as an SCW, and we developed these about 6 or 7 years ago, and I think it's probably fair to say that we are starting to embed them much more in our organisation and everything that we do. And it's different organisations have different values, but as NHS organisations, there's many common themes that run throughout. And using values to engage your workforce is another tool that not only guides your responses, but also reinforces and re-embeds values at all the time. And consistency is really key. And one of the potential dangers of segmenting your workforce, of course, is that some groups can be seen as being prioritised over another group. So using values to balance this and reinforce the rationale for a certain approach is really helpful, because it's not pejorative, it's very broad, and it can be really helpful in terms of explaining that. And in SEW, we promote our values as part of our employee value proposition, and it's a really important part of our engagement and retention strategies and approach. So just coming on to the kind of last couple of slides, and I did say I was going to talk a little bit about SCW and what we've done and the journey that we're on, because it is a journey. We haven't solved it. It'd be nice if we had, but we haven't. So we are on a journey. And we started using these approaches in more detail when we started our Agile, Flexible and Productive programme in 2018. And that was aimed at encouraging outputs and different ways of working, rather than a reliance on the more traditional approach, which you could call presenteeism, I guess, in terms of that. So we started that in 2018. Our programme then was, as you would imagine, rapidly and unexpectedly accelerated with the pandemic, the enforced home working and restrictions across all of our SEW estate and sites. All offices were closed, and no staff were able to work from an office, with the exception of some essential office-based workers, of which we had around 60 out of a staff of about 1,500. We then expanded this approach, and again in line with NHS England and improvement as well. So similar approaches. We applied essential returners. So for those staff who, for whatever reason, found it difficult to remain working at home, we then went through a process where people could come into a limited number of sites to work. And around 65 staff have taken that opportunity. But we're still working at home predominantly across our organisation. And at the start of the enforced home working, we told all of our staff to focus on their priorities, not our priorities. To work if they could, and when they could, and if they couldn't work, to not worry about it. For many, homeschooling, many of you will probably remember that, that day when you had to actually look after your children and school them and try and do a job as well, on top of everything else. Health worries, income of partners, not being able to work, being isolated from friends and family. It all had a massive impact, and sometimes I think we forget that, but it's really important that we go back and remember it, because it does make a difference, and it actually helps us explain why we're trying to do what we are and why it's really important to drive it, because it's about well-being and about that balance. So giving people, our staff, the safe space and permission to make decisions that were most important to them was really vital, and that has had an instrumental impact in terms of how our employees look at our organisation. So a few weeks into the pandemic and lockdown, we realised that the normal methods of feedback were not going to be available, so we introduced a weekly How Are You survey. It was 3 questions, it was run on a weekly basis, and it was really well received, and it supported messages and supported managers to talk to staff who were really struggling. It also gave staff the opportunity to seek specialist help or ask for specialist help if they needed it. And for many, it was just the simple fact that we asked. That we knew they were struggling, but we just were interested in how they were getting on and how they were doing. And all of this fed into our programme. So Building a Stronger Future Together programme, which is something I referenced earlier on. We've also got Building a Culture of Belonging, which feeds very strongly into this programme as well. We use the details that we gained from the staff during the pandemic, our weekly and monthly wellbeing checks. We also developed a suite of wellbeing tools for staff to access, and we also ran 2 of our own internal full staff surveys. So we have historically run a full staff survey. We do it in June and July, and we carried on with that, even though that was quite difficult during the pandemic, and we were worried they might not be as engaged as maybe previously they had. We were delighted with the results. So in 2020 we ran it in July, and in 2021. And in 2021, our staff survey, we achieved 82% response rate, which is quite outstanding, and it was an increase on the previous year. The previous year it was around 78%, but it went up. So we had an 82% response rate. So we know that the results from that are really robust, because it's a really, really good picture of what our staff tell us about our organisation. And many of the questions are the NHS staff survey questions, not all of them, but we do try and build it around that, because we use obviously the information from the RES for our RES and WEDES and our gender pay gap as well. And interestingly, in 2021, 75% of our staff said they would recommend SCW as a place to work. It was 70% in 2020, but in 2019 it was 58%. So we've made quantum leaps in terms of how people feel about our organisation and how we engage with them. And we also captured staff availability and work status, so we could support people if they couldn't work, or we could actually give them other work to do if their standard work had gone. And we wanted to be really flexible about how we utilised available resources for COVID delivery. So this programme was formed from some of the insights we'd gained from our surveys, our networks, our feedback that we got, and we still have got a long way to go. But relationships have been developed in the organisation, and we have built trust, and that's really important. If you want to engage with your workforce, they have to trust you. And we have done that, I think, in the last couple of years, and we're still building on that and working on it. And we still do the majority of our work virtually. We've changed the way we communicate and engage with our staff. We're delighted, for example, that our regular executive management team live meetings, we use them on about once a month, once every 6 weeks, and we have over 50% of our staff who attend. It's only for an hour, but 50% of our staff attend, and those who can't attend it can always watch a recording of it and, at a time when it's convenient for them. We would have never had that sort of response before. We would have never had that engagement before. Working at home makes it more difficult in some respects, but easier in others. So it's just about changing your approach and testing and seeing what works. And we still keep changing it. So we take feedback from staff about, did that work for them? What was the content like? Did they like it? And we've made a number of changes accordingly. Things like, anonymous questioning, and how we can encompass that and make sure that people have the opportunity, but actually it doesn't become a distraction for some. So we still have work to do. For example, how do we ensure that we include staff with disabilities to be included in when we have hybrid, virtual and face-to-face meetings? How do we access that? How do we make sure it's accessible? How do we make sure that staff who aren't comfortable going into an office or have a disability and can't, or hearing impairment, for example, how do we make sure that we include them, that we don't treat them as a second class, because they're not there, that they're treated differently? So we still have work to do, and we have networks now that we can do that with and talk to and actually test things out. And we can have honest discussions because we've developed the relationships, and we can take feedback on what works and what doesn't. So I think that's it. I think I'm just about up to my half hour, maybe a couple of minutes early, but obviously if anybody has any questions, I'm very happy to answer them, or I'll be at the back or any of the team around. If you have anything that you'd like to talk about or anything I can help with, then please do. But thank you very much for attending, and enjoy the rest of your day for your conference. Thank you.